Hey, it's the Devil's Advocate where we sometimes disagree with Rotten Tomatoes.
And sometimes we have to do weird redo video things because we made a video about Vox Lux, kinda.
But then we ran out of battery in the middle of it, and so now, a couple days later, we're going to redo our discussion and review of Vox Lux.
Yeah.
But the good news is, since you guys waited, and we waited, and time passed, it's now become a double review, because in that time, we got to go see Ben is Back, the new Peter Hedges movie that stars his son, Lucas Hedges, as well as Academy Award winner Julia Roberts.
And Courtney B. Vance, who's a Golden Globe winner, Emmy winner.
So a big weekend for indie releases, because Natalie Portman movie, Julia Roberts movie, two like A-list actresses that a couple of years ago were like the biggest in the world, and any movie they were in would obviously be huge, but weirdly are both in low-key limited releases this weekend that are probably never going to go wide, partially because they're both about pretty dark subject matter. Although Lucas Hedges, obviously one of the like literally most relevant actors in America right now, is the star of the other one, so very weird. Anyway, let's look at both of the trailers. You be the guess of which trailer is which. We'll play this one first. Which one do you think it was? You were right. And then we'll play this trailer. Which one do you want to talk about first, Evan?
Let's talk about Ben is Back, because it's fresh on our minds.
Yeah, we just got out of it.
From seeing the film, including a Q&A with the young Lucas Hedges himself. As you saw from the trailer, the film is about a drug addict who makes a surprise trip home for a very short 24-hour period, and a lot of stuff goes wrong. And I think it's safe to say that we both enjoyed the movie.
Hell yeah.
And I think one of the things that I really liked about the movie is that, as far as being a movie about things going wrong, the things actually did go wrong, that had a really good sense of escalation from sort of very minor, relatable drama into things that are a little bit more thriller territory.
Similar to part of Vox Lux, whatever, that we'll talk about when we get to that segment of this review. This is a bottle movie where it takes place over the course of a very rigid timeline. It's a 24-hour period, kind of day-in-the-life situation, from the morning of Christmas Eve until the morning of Christmas Day. It's about an addict coming home from sober living, and he disrupts the family of his mother and her newer husband and their kids. And then, drug dealers get involved, and there's conflict and drama, and a dog gets kidnapped, and it turns into basically a genre thriller. This is like my favorite type of movie when it's done well, where like it's an even mixture of hardcore, resonant, grounded drama. It treats the characters in a very realistic world, and the drama and the traumas are like, again, treated in a way that are melodramatic, where like if something bad happens, if death occurs, or if addiction is there, you treat it really sort of sad and messed up, and the way that people would react, realistically, where it changes, it hurts lives and stuff like that. And then still you have like really intense sort of suspenseful genre elements, like thriller elements or whatever have you, and then when you mix these real characters, these very real feeling characters, into situations that are intense and over the top but don't necessarily abandon the tone that you had set up earlier. Like, it's not like suddenly people start dying left and right like John Wick style, but they do get involved in like a tense, like I said, kidnapping sort of situation. The results you can have when you do that well are really, really strong, because you really care about the characters, and it can make smaller moments feel way more intense. This is a movie where I felt about it in the way that I think a lot of people feel about You Were Never Really Here, that Lynn Ramsey movie that came out earlier this year with Joaquin Phoenix, because that's a movie that it's really intense with its violence, but not constantly, again, not John Wick style. It's just that since the characters are treated with such gravity and weight, every time something violent does happen, it has a really large impact. And then, therefore, you're being drawn in on a movie that, like, on paper, might not really sound that exciting. Like, if I told you, what happens in Ben is Back? It'd be like, well, they drive to one place, and they argue a lot, and they drive to another place, and they argue a lot, and then they drive here, and whatever. And it's like, and then what happens in the climax? And I'm not going to spoil that here, but suffice to say, on the page, it might not seem all that exciting, or surprising, or interesting, or taut. But the truth is, because you're involved with these characters, and because the mood is set so well with the direction from Peter Hedges, and because of the performances from Julia Roberts and Lucas Hedges respectively, you do get like a really strong, intense effect that you would have if the movie was sort of as legitimately tense and over the top as like a Christopher Nolan movie or something like that.
Right. I mean, I think one thing that the movie does really well, and we have an interesting perspective on this for a reason I'll get into in a moment, is delaying gratification of including some of the genre elements. Like, there's quite a while. I remember, I knew that there was something thriller about the movie, but when it started out, I was like, I wonder if this is just that Whiplash thing where people say it's like a thriller, but there is no actual, like, larger stakes that could involve the threat of death or whatever. Like, it doesn't quite count as a thriller unless it feels like there's a physical danger element to some extent. But eventually it gets there. Part of what makes our perspective on it unique is that we missed the first X number of minutes of the movie, not that much, because we just arrived late. And then we had the opportunity, because they started a showtime like right after this one, especially with the Q&A.
Just walked right back into the theater.
and was able to see what we missed and how the movie sets up some character relationships, which was really cool, and also how the movie is able to get the tone and that sense of dread started early, where you have some happy moments cross-cutting to something that seems out of place. So even before you know what the drama is, even before you know what the conflict is that's in this movie, you know that it's about a disruption that's going to occur. Just thematically, the lines are getting set down. And in that version of the movie, there were some people talking, and it was really awesome to see them react to clues sort of being revealed. It's like, oh, if you are into how this is happening now, you're probably going to like the rest of the movie.
It's also just a really good movie about addiction. I haven't seen Beautiful Boy, but I hear this one's better than that one, which is to say that, like, it really, really humanizes a drug addict. It makes you understand addiction, at least in the terms that are necessary for this character and within this story. But you really empathize with Ben, the character of Ben, and you feel for him, and you don't want him to relapse and stuff like that. And when you hear about the awful stuff that has happened, partially because you don't necessarily see it, which is maybe a fault of the film, but also just partially because the performance is so good from Lucas Hedges, you really do root for the character. And more so, you really feel for Julia Roberts' character, too, who plays the mother here. It's a really good mother and son movie, and, any good movies about a core relationship, and this movie really nails what its core relationship is, which, again, as we said, informs the genre thrills, because you care so much about the characters and how they relate to each other. So, yeah, as a person who has a mother, I found it to be a really strong, effective, emotional film, and I'm very glad that it got made. Funny enough, Peter Hedges, an Oscar-nominated filmmaker, directed this movie. It's Lucas Hedges' dad, and like kind of a running joke with Evan and I for a couple months when we first heard about this movie is like, this nepotism bullshit. Like, Lucas Hedges gets nominated for an Academy Award, and then his dad, who's probably some hack who had this one script he'd been working on for years, finally gets to make a big Hollywood movie because his son is in the movie. It's like, boy, were we wrong. Like, no, his dad is a super competent filmmaker, again, way before his son was ever an actor, and then they came together and made something that was really potent and good and personal. So it was cool. I'd love to see another collaboration between these boys.
So the question is, John, would you want to see another movie by a different filmmaker, this filmmaker being Brady Corbett, directing, I think, his second movie being Vox Lux?
Maybe. Vox Lux is really up, like, compared to Ben is Back. Vox Lux is a very dark film. Ben is Back is all about drug addiction, and there's a lot of discussion about overdosing and children that have died to addiction and kidnapping of animals.
That's involved,
and deceit and lying to family and stealing from family. And yet, it's like, I don't know, it's a walk in the park compared to Vox Lux. Vox Lux is a movie that you don't want to spoil. Evan and I saw this movie knowing very little about it. What I knew about it was it's yet another movie where an actress plays a pop star this year. We had Lady Gaga in A Star Is Born. We have Elizabeth Moss in Her Smell, which comes out, I think, next year. And then Natalie Portman's movie was Vox Lux, where she's playing a pop star, and I knew that the one image they had released was like her on stage. I knew Sia did the music. But other than that, not a clue. And then when I did sit down to see this movie, which was now about a month ago, so forgive us if we're losing some of the details when we talk about the plot. But when we did see this movie at the Austin Film Festival, I was quite shocked about what was happening in the first, not just first act, but whole first half of the film. So with that being said, to talk about the actual meat of this movie, you kind of have to spoil it. Evan and I both agree. So what we'll say is, if you want to see Vox Lux, turn off the video now. And our ultimate recommendation is it's a pretty good movie. It's really interesting. It's very, very sort of dark, harrowing thematic material. And if you're easily squeamish and upset about real life tragedy stuff being drawn in, being connected to fiction, definitely stay away from this movie. It is not for you. It's very triggering in many ways. But yeah, if you're in for a dark ride with Natalie Portman giving a multifaceted performance that is very polarizing, because it's like either you hate her Staten Island accent or you love it. A lot of people are talking about it. Then yeah, check it out, because I think it's a really stimulating movie. You still here? So you want me to be spoiled, or you already saw it? Well, then what's it about, Evan?
Nice. So the start of the movie depicts a school shooting, which seems very... I mean, we have school shootings all the time. This one in particular feels reminiscent of the Columbine shooting, but also many others. And involved in the shooting there's a young girl who is shot in the neck. And then after the shooting, as part of like a memorial service, she and her sister have written the song, and she sings it, and she blows up and becomes nationally famous. And the movie takes a real hard turn where it's about this pop star career that suddenly blossoms out of that. And then that's about a half or even 2/3 of the movie, because then the last bit, which John alluded to before, becomes sort of a bottom movie, a day in the life of this now adult pop star who's set to make this sort of comeback performance. She has a new album coming out called Vox Lux, hence the title of the movie. It seems to be, like I said, some sort of comeback thing. She's doing a show on Staten Island, going back to her home to an amphitheater there to perform.
But you guys already know that
Right,
if you've seen the movie, or you're just being spoiled.
Or you're being spoiled, and you just want to know. And obviously what's crazy about this movie is not just that it has that interesting story and structure, but that stylistically a movie that starts with a really sparse and haunting depiction of violence then goes on and has all of these filmmaking techniques. We have voiceover, we have these montages of sped up footage, we have really crazy camera angles, we have the credits running in reverse at the start, all kinds of stuff to throw you off point, in addition to, like I said, something that is just on the surface very emotionally affecting.
You know what movie this reminded me of that I didn't say earlier when we messed up trying to do the recording with the batteries, which, by the way, are the batteries good? Yeah, they're good. But it reminded me of a Lars von Trier movie, specifically The House That Jack Built. We saw The House That Jack Built, Lars von Trier's newest film, a couple weeks ago, and there's a review on the channel if you want to check that out. We're not going to link it, but you know how to get there. And that movie, in very Lars von Trier-y way, has abrupt transitions between scenes where there's this over-the-top voiceover that's very on the nose and discussing the nature of art and like sort of that movie and stuff like that. And you ultimately find out at the end of that movie, like it's, without spoiling it, but like it becomes clear that Lars von Trier is working with a large metaphor for his own career. Anyway, this movie, you have Natalie Portman. Who does the voice? Like Natalie Portman does some voiceover.
Willem Dafoe does.
Willem Dafoe, that's right.
Which it's Lars von Trier collaborators. That's
exactly
great in that sense.
That's why, yeah. So yeah, this movie has these really interesting transitions that are, again, super tonally over the top. Where like it is not immersing you in the story; it stops, and you're in a movie theater, but you think about it, and it's kind of interesting. Of Willem Dafoe sort of giving anecdotes about stuff that's going on behind the scenes in the head of the character, of Natalie Portman's character, or when she's a child or whatever. And he also fills you in on stuff that had happened in between moments that you saw. Because, like everyone was saying, it's a very weird movie in that the first half or the first 2/3 is a big timeline. Like, it's jumping years. It's like greatest hits of this woman growing up and becoming a pop star. It's her first boyfriend. It's being, exploited by the record company and this and that, and her first show. And then it's specific, like, no, we're going one day in a life, which is a really interesting choice. But Willem Dafoe kind of fills in the gaps for not only the stuff that you're skipping around in the first half, but he fills in a ton of what had happened in between her as a child. The last thing you saw is her as a child, and then her as Natalie Portman, which is like a huge, like, 12-year jump, a 15-year jump, or whatever it is. And I really enjoyed that stuff, and that's what makes the sort of abstract imagery and weird isms of the movie all come together. You have stuff like at the end, Willem Dafoe explaining what is like ultimately a huge point in this movie, which is like big spoilers or whatever, is that Natalie Portman reveals that she made a deal with the devil to survive when she was shot, and like part of her pop star career is this sort of meditation on like how being famous in this way and her addiction and whatnot could all be the result of the devil's doing, a plea that someone made and giving themselves away to the devil.
Right.
And like, what's that supposed to say about the nature of pop music and stuff like that? But also, like, it's just kind of cheeky, right? Like, for a movie that's really, really dark, it's silly, like Lars von Trier movies are, with you have Willem Dafoe's big embodying voice talking about this pop star making a deal with the devil. Like, I don't know, I really enjoyed some aspects of this movie because it's just such a thinker, and it really does play around with different tones. It gets so dark, it does get kind of fun and funny. It's really well performed in my opinion. There's some really cool dynamic camera movements, but at the end of the day, you can't really pin anything down on it, and that's like on purpose, right? Like, the movie does not want you to walk away feeling one thing. And sometimes that can be really frustrating, but in a movie like this where it's paced pretty well and I think it was enjoyable to watch enough, I do enjoy that coming away from a film being like, well, it didn't all come together in a way that you could put your finger on and feel like, oh, that's what we were getting at. But in another way, like it's almost better because you come away feeling so many different things and having such an experience. It's a very audio-visual experience seeing this movie.
Yeah, I think that there's a couple things. One, I think it's really easy to not give this movie the benefit of the doubt. If you go in and you see that it's pulling all these tricks, you say, oh, this kind of feels like a first-time director. And I don't think all the ideas work. There's a point where the movie wants to make a commentary specifically about how America consumed culture following 9/11. This is in addition to the plotline it's making about like a certain kind of child abuse that happens when you become famous quickly. This in addition to how you survive a school shooting. This in addition to the clues and seeds of this Faustian plotline that will be revealed at the very end, where it's like, oh, she shoulders all the devil. So is all that going to work? No. But because the filmmaking, the performances especially, and some of just the raw filmmaking, some really cool, when I say cool, I mean like really artistically effective camera moves or editing things, enough of it works that I think it is, like John said, better to sort of see a movie and have something to think about than get too concerned with the fact that its reach does overextend its grasp.
Although, like you said, people can and will be offended by the fact that it uses school shootings, something that is a very real, harsh reality in the United States specifically right now, in 2018, a reoccurring horrible tragedy, mass gun violence. On multiple occasions in this movie there's mass gun violence, and it uses it as a plot device, right? In a fictional movie, it's not a real school shooting, and it's being used around the lens of like this sort of movie that's sometimes wry. It's not really wry about that, but this is a somewhat wry movie about other things, about a pop star. So I could totally see that. But at the same time, any art that someone could call brave, someone else could call exploitative, and that's sort of the nature of stuff like this. That's why other people call it brave. You know, I don't think we're here providing final judgment of like, no, it's actually a good use of the situation, or are we saying, oh, it's horrible and we were offended? Because clearly we weren't that offended. We were certainly affected by it, but yeah, it's not a perfect film, and this is why this is not a perfect YouTube video. Because there's something we could say in this video that like sort of capitulates it all in a way that puts it in a neat box. But again, I think the director would argue that there's no version of this movie that fits in a neat box, and that is sort of the point. So if that sounded interesting to you, or if that was interesting to you, if you watched it, then right on, man. I'm sure some people will think this is like the best movie that came out all year because it's so daring.
Right.
But for people like us who just watch so many movies, like we watch movies all the time, we've seen so many different types of movies, we have been affected by stuff. Even a movie like this, even a movie as probing as this, we can still come away feeling like 6 out of 10, 7 out of 10, good time, which is kind of funny because it feels like a movie like you can't feel that way about. You couldn't possibly. You'd either hate it or love it. And we're like, no, I like stuff about it and didn't like other stuff about it.
It's interesting. I would argue, and I don't want this to come across like a backhanded compliment, that I liked it more than I thought I would. Like once it started doing certain things, I thought it would lose me more. But the stuff that worked has made itself quite memorable. That's the one nice thing about reviewing a movie you saw a month ago, is you know better where it stands. You won't overhype, and you also if in fact it wasn't memorable, then you can't even review it. So like, I don't know, I guess it wasn't very good. In this case, certainly things that I remember about it. So
anyhow, that was the Vox Lux Ben is Back review. Yeah. Vox Lux is a movie that's been titillating a lot of folks, and for us it was like, yeah, pretty solid, but not exactly intense. And Ben is Back, a movie that is getting a little bit of a shrug from some people. It does have good reviews, but no one seems to be like in love with it. But we really did love it. Yeah. Like we thought it was excellent. So what the hell is your take?
Go watch A Most Violent Year.
Most Violent Year is so good. J.C. Chandor's masterpiece. Also, go watch Green Book, great movie. Go watch Roma, really great movie. Great movie. So much stuff to watch, whether it's on DVD, Blu-ray, 4K UHD Blu-ray, Netflix streaming, Hulu streaming, video on demand from Comcast Cable, theatrical release. Am I missing anything? VHS, DVD. I said DVD.
VR with the Cine VR.
Cine VR, watching with the digital stuff. We watched the...
I'm in the movie.